How's it going, guys? Tame Type 1 here, back with you once again. And today, what I'd like to do is I'd like to get into the comparison between this new guy I found named Dr. Cywes, the carb addiction doc. Seems to be a pretty big name, seems to relatively new. I didn't hear him about him when I was doing these videos a couple years ago. But he seems to be big on the scene now when he's had a few videos talking about type 1 diabetes, and he's actually compared himself to Dr. Bernstein and has basically said that he's sort of the evolution past Dr. Bernstein, that he's what is going beyond Dr. Bernstein and on to like progressing forward, something like this. And so I thought he was pretty interesting. I thought his take was pretty interesting. I actually do agree with a lot of his criticisms, but I don't agree with him on everything. But let's just get into it because it's very interesting. And by the way, just so you know, like I said, I agree with him on most things, and I think he seems like a doctor who has a lot of patience, and he probably does a pretty good job. He's a big carnivore guy. He's big on zero carb, which I'm cool with that. Hey, that's good. That's nice. Um, he's not diabetic himself though, so that's something to consider. But he probably does a very good job with his patients, probably much better than any normal doctor. So kudos to you, Dr. Cywes. But let me go ahead and get into my opinions on him and sort of compare and contrast with him versus the Dr. Bernstein approach that I'm so familiar with and the kind of thing that I promote. Although I kind of almost lean more towards his direction in some ways. Let's get into it though. So I looked at a few of Dr. Cywes' videos, and basically he's basically a very low carb guy, just like Dr. Bernstein is, but he's not so big on the vegetables. He's much more open to zero carb, much more open to carnivore, which if you know my content, you know that I am as well. Now, do I say you need to do carnivore? No. I think it's nice. I think it works. I don't think vegetables are necessarily a big requirement. And actually, I do eat a little bit of vegetables. I eat, you could say, meat-based, where I eat almost a vast majority of my calories are from meat. But every now and then I'll add some fermented veggies or add some, something like this. Very rarely am I like totally 100% pure carnivore, salt and meat. Very rarely am I doing that. There's always a little bit of plant in there somewhere, but it's not a whole lot. But Dr. Bernstein, on the other hand, he has a much larger emphasis on vegetables. Now, can it work? Yes. I don't say vegetables are bad either. But he does seem to see them as much more of a requirement, and maybe that's due to the sort of old school learning. And speaking of which, another difference between him and Cywes is that Cywes is also much more animal fat friendly, as I am too. Dr. Bernstein's his approach he would consider more high protein rather than high fat, right? He doesn't believe that you should be eating too much fat. And I would actually lean more towards the Cywes and say, well, animal fat's actually very good for you, and you do need that for energy. That's going to provide the ketones that provide the fuel to your body. Now, of course, I think you can have too much of a good thing, but I don't think animal fat's bad for you. I don't think you need to avoid it. Have that steak with the fat trimmings. Go nuts with it. Just don't go too crazy. You could say though that one reason from a diabetic perspective that you might want to avoid too much fat is that what I have noticed is that a lot of fat does tend to sort of make the rise in protein extend longer. I'm not sure what it is about it. Maybe it's just sort of gums things up. I'm not sure what it is exactly. But I have noticed where like a leaner meat like chicken, it'll hit me faster than, let's say, a fatty ribeye steak, for example. And maybe the fat has something to do with that. I'm not quite sure. But that is something I've observed, and I think Dr. Bernstein talked a little bit about that as well. So, yeah, there's an effect with fat, like a very sort of subtle kind of effect like that, but it's something you can't manage. That's why I talk about splitting boluses. That's why I talk about, for example, taking a little bit of R before you eat, and then maybe 2 hours, 3 hours later, taking more. Because then you can deal with that extended rise in protein, right? And sometimes you have to do that even without a ton of fat. I've had to do it before if I just eat too much protein, honestly. If I eat like a big bucket of wings or something like that, right? Anyway, back to Cywes. He agrees that fat is not a bad thing. and I'm with him on that. So another big agreement. Um, where I would, oh, one more thing definitely that I agree with him on, another criticism with him and Dr. Bernstein, is that he's much more friendly to fasting, which I am too. I think fasting is a good thing. I think intermittent fasting can be useful if you can make it work with your diet. As long as you're not dealing with protein rises way after the fact like I was when I tried it, you can make it work for you. And I mean, even just, I don't like the idea of having to eat 3 times a day. There's no logical reason that you have to eat a specific amount of times a day if you're not feeling hungry. If you're getting the calories you need, if you're getting the nutrition you need, why is it to be 3, 4, 5 times a day? Obviously, the ADA recommends this, and I think it's very faulty. But even Dr. Bernstein, he's not big on fasting either. He's not big on just eating twice a day or just eating once a day. So on that, I have to sort of agree with those criticisms as well. Now, there are things you need to keep in mind if you're eating a lot in one sitting, because again, that heavier amount of protein is going to hit you harder and hit you longer. So you have to figure out your dosing for that. I've went into that in other videos where I've experienced it with myself, but certainly it's still manageable. And certainly there is a nice thing about eating less meals, because that's less variables to deal with throughout the day. If you skip breakfast, which I do every day, I only eat twice a day. I very rarely, very, very rarely eat what you call a breakfast. And even then it's maybe like a snack, right? And because I avoid breakfast, I don't have to dose for 3 meals. I can only dose for 2. And then there's less worry of me dosing wrong or, something happening. And I'm doing with a much more stable line during that first start of the day. Great start of the day, right? Something to keep in mind. So that's his other criticism with Dr. Bernstein, is that he's not big on the fasting. And again, that kind of comes from that old school way of thought, I feel like. Not that I dislike Bernstein, but it is what it is. He's kind of an old guy. Now, let me talk a little bit about what I disagree with Dr. Cywes on, because his approach is actually very different in some key ways. In the videos I watched, I never saw him mention our insulin once, for example. And I know he knows about it because he's read Dr. Bernstein's book. So it's not like he doesn't know what our insulin is. Instead, his approach is nothing to do with changing your insulin to our insulin, anything like this, like the kind of stuff I promote. Instead, it's about relying on the technology, mainly. It's about having a CGM. He says this is a requirement. You have to have a CGM and you have to have a pump. That way, your CGM can notify you when your blood sugar starts getting high and use your pump to just bring it back down. And from what I understand, and by the way, Dr. Cywes, if you somehow find this video, deep in the nethers of the internet one day, and you think I'm being too critical, you think I'm not being generous with what your approach actually is, let me know. But my basic understanding, surface level, from the videos I watched, is that the approach centers around basically watching for your blood sugar creeping up after a heavy protein meal, and as it creeps up, you just bring it back down with insulin from your pump, and you just keep doing that, basically. So pump users, I'm not sure if that can happen automatically, if you can set your pump to start correcting if it goes over a certain number. His would be over 100, so 80 to 100, which is correct. You want to have it between 80 and 100, typically. I'm not sure how automated that is, but that would be my first concern. I can definitely see the benefits of this kind of approach where you're simply letting the pump, letting the CGM tell you when your blood sugar starts creeping up and letting your pump fix it. Because with the protein, and a fast-acting insulin in the pump, you actually can fix a protein rise pretty well. But again, you have to keep it going because that protein rise extended. That's why I like to use our insulin. The problem I have, though, if it's not something you can necessarily automate on the pump, or maybe not the pump that you have, is how do you take care of nighttime? What if you eat a meal later in the day, let's say a pretty high protein meal, and you see your blood sugar creeping up and you correct it, and then you go to bed, but you stop correcting it because you're sleeping? Your blood sugar is going to be higher when you wake up, is it not? Maybe you can automate this. Maybe that's a good solution. I'm not too big on it, though, just for that reason alone. And another thing I don't like about that is Well, again, I might not be giving its fair due because he did say at the end of one of those videos, hey, if you want to learn more about this, talk to me. We'll set up an appointment. We'll do some counseling. But even that, I'm not a big fan of. I don't like the idea that, oh, you have to talk to me. You have to rely on me to give you the information you need to manage your diabetes. I don't like that. I gave this information out for free. I'm a diabetic, and the information I got that set my life on track, I got by just paying 20 bucks for a book and by looking on YouTube. And I want that same experience for you. I want to be free because information like this about how to manage your diabetes, it should ultimately be something you have easy access to because, I'm in it to help people save their lives. I'm not in it to make a buck. If I was in it to make a buck, um, you know, like, I haven't even done any coaching for a long time, so it's the opposite of a grift. And I don't think Cywes is grifting either. I think he's legitimate. Um, he's definitely doing good work, but I don't like this idea of, oh, you need me to help you fix this. I prefer to simply give the fundamentals, give you techniques, all of it for free, and then help you make sure that you can figure out for yourself rather than me do the work for you and trying to get money for it, right? And another thing I don't like is the idea that you need a CGM or that you need a pump. See, I don't have a CGM. Believe that or not, I don't have a pump either. Believe that or not, I used to. I forgot it. Why? Part of the reason was that, I'm sure I could get good use out of a CGM. The one I had, the Freestyle Libre, I didn't like very much at the time because I couldn't correct it when it was off base, when it was like 50 points higher than it's supposed to be. So the accuracy was an issue for me. Maybe the newer ones are better than that. I haven't really tried them. But ultimately, my problem with having to need a CGM or need a pump is that this technology is very expensive and it's very proprietary. And I feel like there's not always going to be. I feel like we take it for granted that we can always access these things. Sometimes you can't. Let's say if you're traveling abroad, for example, you'll be able to access your CGM supplies if you need it. No, but you might be able to find some syringes. You might be able to find some more insulin. And in a scenario where, let's say, the economy collapses or something like that, I don't think that's very far-fetched, do you? You look around. In a situation like that where you call the pharmacy, you need your CGM patches or whatever, you need your pump supplies, and they have nothing, well, what do? If all you know is the Cywes approach and you don't have any of these fundamentals, the kind that I give you, talking about our insulin, talking about, um, you know, testing and correcting and seeing your diabetes as like a constant experiment, these fundamentals that help you really tame your type 1, if all you're relying on is your numbers to go up and then you correct them downwards and that's all there is to it, that's all you know, then if you go with that CGM, you're not going to know what to do. If you go with that pump, you're not going to know what to do. So I believe in freedom. I believe in not needing technology to get through life because ultimately I don't think it's all going to last forever. And I think it's a pretty healthy, reasonable mentality to have, honestly. So, and I'll get into that maybe more in another video about why that is, about more of my views on why it's good to have a mentality of not relying so much on the technology. But yeah, I don't like the idea of having to need a CGM. Now, it's nice to have a CGM. If you have a CGM that works for you, awesome. Keep it up, dude. And I'm sure if I had a CGM, maybe I could get slightly better control. But what I'm saying is you don't need a CGM to have good blood sugars. It's nice. If your insurance pays for it, great. If you can afford it, wonderful. But I don't like the idea of it being a requirement, which it seems to be absolutely a requirement in the Cywes approach. So I'll leave it at that. Ultimately, I agree with a lot with what Cywes says. I agree with a lot of his criticism of Dr. Bernstein. I don't so much agree with his with sort of absconding the fundamentals of like a low-carb Bernstein approach and instead just relying on the technology, which kind of seems to be the case with Dr. Cywes, although maybe I'm not getting enough credit. I haven't fully looked into the guy. Forgive me if you watch this later, but let me go. Don't get too mad. But I'll leave it at that. Hope you guys have a wonderful day. And hey, if you have any thoughts on the guy, if his hit maybe helped you, if you ever talked to them, that'd be wonderful to hear about. Let me know in the comments below what your thoughts are. And until next time, keep tending your type 1.